Okay, perfect. Okay, hopefully there are no more echoes. So, everyone, hello and welcome to the Sustainability and Research and Practice seminar. Hopefully, if my slide goes.
Here, if that's muted, does it listen to that microphone? Okay. Or if not, because you are on. No,
okay.
She's on soon. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
I'm on. Okay. Yeah, we're good.
All right,
perfect. Okay, so welcome. My name is Emma. I am the moderator today. I am a student ambassador for the College of Arts and Humanities, and I'm yay, woo, and I am an English major with minors in creative writing and women's and gender studies. Before we get into our panelist introductions, I want to go through some sustainability information here at WCU. Obviously, we have some very important education things here. We have the Sustainability Pathway Certificate, which I am on right now. It's a 12-credit course, which is a little bit less than a minor. It can go great within your gen ed stuff, obviously. And then we have the minor in the interdisciplinary minor in sustainability and resilience, which is a little bit more of an 18-credit thing. There's some information up there about it, and you can always go on WCU's website to learn more about that. Obviously, we have an Office of Sustainability here, and you can go on their website to learn more about that as well for events like this one. And then if there are any English majors in the room, there is a Sustainability and Environmental Humanities focus area in the English major focus area options, so you could also do that as well. But on to our panelist introductions. We have Dr. Cheryl Wanko. She is a professor of English, as well as the director of the interdisciplinary minor in sustainability and resilience. So if you want to talk to her about that, you definitely could. We have Dr. Megan Schraedley. Hopefully I said that correctly. She is a professor of organizational communication. We have Dr. William Lalicker. He is a professor of English and rhetoric here at Westchester. We have Dr. Maxine Gesualdi, thank you. She's a professor of organizational communication here as well. And then we have Dr. Joseph Miller, who is a professor of philosophy here. So that is my little introductory presentation. I will stop sharing for a minute, and then we can get very quickly on to our first panel question. This is open to every panel question is open to every panelist. You can just shout out if you want to talk or respond to the question. Hopefully everyone can see me in Zoom here. So our first question is that many people associate environmentalism and sustainability with recycling and saving the planet, or like the hard sciences and everything. So how does your area of specialization or your academic program connect with environmentalism and sustainability? And how are they similar and different to those common perceptions? That was a loaded question. I'm sorry, I know, but I think it was a good generalization about it.
It's very quiet here, so I'll be happy to start.
Thank you.
Our colleagues in the sciences have the facts, and the facts are important, but facts don't speak for themselves. And because I'm focused on issues of writing an argument, I think that link, the ability to make the argument, the ability to communicate, and even to analyze arguments that sometimes are false, that work against sustainability, I think that's just a vital skill. And because facts don't speak for themselves, and because there aren't enough people who speak for facts that will privilege sustainability, we need every single person who's doing the work of this university, meaning going out, using the tax dollars that come with it, and make citizens who can make this a better place. We need them to know how to do that. And I can talk about how that happens in my courses, but I'll just start with that general point.
Yeah, I mean, so I studied philosophy, mostly ethics and Native American philosophy. If you've ever taken an ethics course, the kind of focus is on values. And so when I think about issues of sustainability or environmental problems, they're not just technological issues. A lot of them stem from what kind of value system we have and what kind of framework are we working in. And so addressing those kinds of concerns, I think, is also vital, in addition to being able to critically assess arguments and engage in dialogues, but that ability to like reflect on your own standing and your own influence and what values you are bringing to the table and what you're doing with them. Yeah, I mean, that is essentially like a humanities, a philosophy and ethics kinds of thing that most of the sciences don't end up addressing. So it's a nice complement in addition to the technological issues to also be asking questions about how are our values playing a role in our efforts or lack thereof to address these kinds of concerns.
And to build on those two, right, that science doesn't do the whole job, and that we have to talk about our values and ethics. I like to publish the thesis that the humanities is actually what ends up changing the world. 2 cases in point. You might know Rachel Carson's Silent Spring from 1962. Because of this book, because of its wide distribution across the United States, we benefited so much as a country from what it caused in the regulatory sphere, the governmental sphere. It got rid of DDT, for example. But it didn't just stop there with the problematic chemicals that our post-World War II industrial complex was dumping on us, right? It was part of the initial impetus for the EPA in, I believe it's 1970. They're all around the same time, right? The the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the first Earth Day, all because of a book, right? So I can go on about that. Second one, so the 70s are going on, and we have this kind of wacky Pennsylvanian who moves out to the west, Edward Abbey. He got at least a master's, I'm not sure, maybe a PhD in philosophy. He takes things a little bit further and says, good start, government, on the basis of this, but not enough is getting done. So what happens when the citizens take things into their own hands? So he advocated a certain type of hands-on activism that he called monkey wrenching, that galvanized the environmental movement, especially kind of more activist groups like Earth First. This side of environmental action comes in for some critique. We could talk about that if you like, but it's because of books like The Monkey Wrench Gang that we have that type of activity. And finally, work you should know that's going on now, climate action planning in many communities and on our campus. This is where we write plans and things. Writing is something that our fields are good at that help change communities from the ground up. So props for them.
I do not have props, sadly, but to build on that that movement to action, I teach in organizational communication where you're very much adjacent to management communication and how companies especially organize around messages of sustainability, how they actually take action around sustainability, but also how they contribute to the negative aspects that we're trying to combat. So in what I do as more of an applied use of some of these ideas and values, I have students evaluate a brand that they use every day, a favorite brand. They look at the positives and negatives, greenwashing, all of that. And I kind of take the approach of, if you can't beat them, join them. So if we're more aware of these things and how companies are going to market and damaging the environment, not putting people first, and our students are going out and working for these organizations. If their values are such that they value the things that we're teaching them, then they're going to be able to change from the inside and really push for stronger change. So we tend to have very eye-opening conversations about brands like Nike or Lululemon. Stanley Waters, this one this semester that people were looking into. So definitely throwing that monkey wrench in there, but creating people who are going out there and working for these organizations and then being able to push for change.
Yeah, and adding on to all of these really great ways in which the humanities are so important to the connections between environmentalism and sustainability. I think as a communication scholar, I'm always thinking about how important it is to co-create change and to make sure that how you are interacting with others is done in such a way that you are both listening and having a dialogue with those people, not just shouting out information to them. That doesn't tend to change people's minds or persuade them to alter their behaviors. So I think in the field of communication in particular, we are very good at acknowledging conflict can be productive and how important it is to shift our culture if we want to make a world that's for us and much more of a flourishing type of place.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Look, the interdisciplinary thing is, and you had mentioned it too, is really important because I think a lot of times, as the question was worded, if you think about the hard sciences only as being our only path forward, there's a lot that's not gonna end up happening. So I don't know, does anyone know what geoengineering is? So like those kinds of experiments where they're intentional manipulations of the climate or the atmosphere. So like there are discussions of releasing sulfur into the atmosphere because like when a volcano erupts, that'll block out UV rays, and we want to try and mimic that. And so they're trying to develop technologies to do it. The problem is you can't really test that on a large scale without just doing it.
Yeah.
And so then all the values and the ability to communicate and go through these organizational things, like I said, the arguments for this stuff, it really comes into play because if just left to science, we could do real bad damage that's irreversible. And so emphasizing on like, these are multifaceted problems, I think is gonna do more to help solve these kinds of things than just technology and science stuff.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add before I move?
Can I add
Yeah.
to that? Because when you're thinking about geoengineering and what might happen in the future, right, we're thinking about types of fiction, right? Which is what our group does as well. And so using our imaginations and writing about it to explore what these futures might look like. For example, with geoengineering, Neil Stephenson's Termination Shock is a big, thick, long, really good novel that deals just with that, with sulfur in the atmosphere. It's very fun.
All right, that's wonderful. And I thank you, Dr. Wanko, for bringing that up, because what I was going to say is largely in the humanities, our stories are a large part of how we communicate, and whose stories we tell versus whose stories we don't tell is really important. So my next question is, why is climate change a human rights and equity issue? How could that realization affect the way we develop solutions to address climate change? Would anybody like to start us off with that question?
I can start if that's okay.
Yeah.
So like, I think one of the interesting things that he's a former professor of mine, I pulled up that I don't have the props, but I have a picture. There's a book called The Perfect Moral Storm by a philosopher named Steve Gardner at University of Washington in Seattle. But one of the things he says is one of the things that makes climate change unique as a social problem is it's not just one issue. It's not like the environmental damage by itself, but it's now we have intergenerational concerns. Like what are we going to do for future generations? We have a host of concerns that are all like swirling together, one of which is this human rights issue. And so when you think about who is going to be most affected by issues of sustainability and climate change, it's usually the worst off. And the people who are contributing the least to it are the ones that end up suffering the most. And so you end up having another colleague of mine does research on environmental immigration. And so you're starting to see influx of refugees because their homelands are being flooded and destroyed and unbearable to live in anymore. And so now immigration becomes more of an ethical concern given the effects that climate change is having. And so redlining the neighborhoods in the United States, one of the things that you're starting to see is heat stroke and heart disease are increasing in those formerly redlined neighborhoods because they're mostly concrete. So as the temperature rises, so do those conditions. And who happens to live in those conditions? People who are suffering the most. And so it seems very much like inseparable from a kind of human rights perspective.
I'll jump off of that too, to say that in our world, a lot of our political boundaries are at odds with kind of our natural geographic sort of features across especially across the US, right? I'm from the Midwest, we've got like the Ozarks, we have, South, we have Southwest, we have the deserts, right? We have these different areas that have past, had groups of people that knew how to manage those types of lands and territories. And as we're thinking of equity issues, we are running into a lot of barriers around kind of these hard lines where people are trying to pass laws, pass legislation to address really difficult issues that are because of the changing climate. And if we can't do that, right? Because of these changes, it just becomes really challenging for people to interact with each other because of the different laws across these different territories, and different states. And I think harder to interact, harder to communicate with each other when those barriers are set.
That's wonderful. Does anyone have anything else to add to that question?
I'm glad to comment on that
Sure.
too. This will be a little bit blunt, but I'll say short-term obscene wealth is built on profits made from fuels and products that victimize the poor and that throw a roadblock up to sustainability. And that's definitely an equity issue. But the thing is this, everybody is affected by what's happening through the climate change. I am happily a comfortable, unionized, well-paid professor, which means that I have a retirement that's built upon investments that have made a lot of different companies. Even the ones that aren't necessarily implicated directly in the improper profits made by anti-climate types of industries are vulnerable. If in fact some of my retirement money is in insurance companies. Insurance companies have set themselves up with an assumption of how much they have to account for that climate investments. But there are more of those in the plan. So even if I'm a comfortable, you can call me even a semi-rich kind of person in a large scale of things, even if I'm not living in the lowlands of Bangladesh, I'm going to be in trouble, not just inconvenience. And so we're all in this together. And that's the thing. We really are all in this together. And that should make us think about equity in ways we haven't before. Because no one's going to escape if we don't solve the problem.
So I have a teenage son, and we were talking about something related to the weather, because we had 1 or 2 days of snow where skiers, like skiing around here, pretty much is non-existent anymore, like it was maybe 15 years ago. And we were talking about it, and he said, well, you know, people are looking to go to Mars. And I said, well, let's think about that for a minute. What people do you think are going to because I think the break is going to get to happen. Unless you know, something happens to me and you become a multi-billion. We're not all going to Mars. And so we need to think about this in a way that, yes, there are these kind of ideas out there that people have, but there's no planet B. This is it, and we need to take care of it. So it's that storytelling that everybody's affected. The snow that is non-existent here, that used to be here, that's because of something, and that something is because we have to address the climate and the need. So it's just the story that we tell, the awareness that we have to make those really clear.
There was maybe that's it. There's a philosopher named Kyle White, who's an indigenous philosopher in Michigan, but I saw him give a talk once in Seattle, and one of the things he said, we was talking about geoengineering and kind of issues of values, and he said, it's really weird to see white people now being concerned about losses of land and habitat destruction. And he's like, gee, I wonder what groups of people could have ever had to deal with that before. And so maybe who should you listen to? It's those group of people that are most effective and most addressing these kinds of issues. And if they don't have a voice at the table, then again, we're going to be in that situation where who's going to Mars? Well, it ain't the people that should be going, but only those that can afford it.
If I could bring that back into the area of language, just briefly to close, because language, again, is something that folks in humanities focus on. Let's sit for a minute in that phrase endangered species, right? And we use that to divide us off from, oh, those eagles or whatever, those toads, right, who are going to suffer from all of this. And that's a real kind of easy divide, right? When we don't recognize, right, that we're all going to be affected, and we need to listen to some people more than others, because in 1991, one of the first kind of documents of environmental justice, which is essentially what we're talking about here. A letter from the Southwest Organizing Project talking about how they've been impressed in environmental ways, was one of the first documents to use that phrase for threatened communities, for oppressed communities, endangered species. But I think that the decades since 1991 have proven that that's a term that we all should be thinking about very seriously.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for all those responses. In this room, we're obviously here exchanging information about sustainability and environmental justice, and information about climate change. And I'm sure all of you have seen information on your social media pages and in the news about this kind of thing. So my next question kind of has to do with that information. What has the media or pop culture's role been in creating a push for environmental advocacy? Why is communication so important in how we understand and participate in the fight against climate change?
So I would like to start this one, because I'm gonna do a little exercise. All right, I'm gonna say 2 words and then you tell me the next thing that comes to mind. Reduce, reuse,
Recycle.
okay. So why do we all say that? Just it's growth, right? That is something that has been drilled into us from many different aspects of our lives, from very little to now. And that is a clear example of how messages and communication and using pop culture and putting it into just the public communication around us can make us think in different ways. And so you mentioned Earth Day. For me, as a 70s kid, like Earth Day was a really big deal. I remember getting my Earth Day like shirt, and we'd like do everything on Earth Day. But even then, like in the 80s, I feel like we had a lot of this very pop culture focused advocacy, because we had Live Aid, the concert, we had Farm Aid, the reduce, reuse, recycle. All of these things can really create awareness, and that awareness then has to be there in order to develop change and change in values, change in behavior, and all of that. So Earth Day is the biggest one, I think, in that reduce, reuse, recycle. I think it's a good example of the power of communication to change the way we think about these issues.
Yeah, I'll go off this too, that communication is good for creating awareness, but also in helping us better understand or get in touch with, I guess, a desire to change, right? So in Humanities, we're masters of comedy, of fiction, of art, of creating beauty. And I think all those things come across in our social media platforms, or in, not in social media, but hardcover books and things that that help us better digest and understand others, right? Others who may be like us, others who may not be like us. Some of you may have seen on social media the ways in which new climate activists are like throwing paint on pieces of the Louvre and other museums around the world in order to just create more visibility for these kinds of issues. And so certainly these things bring us together, and I think they're some of the most powerful drivers for us to gather around and to collaborate on important issues, things that we care about.
Just to point to another milestone, an inconvenient truth, right?
Right.
What started, a lot of the kind of current popular knowledge of climate change, it was a film. And film. When you go back and look at it, we're talking about slides. So yeah, media is really important, and you'll be able to point to like these particular things that kind of set off action, and that's why our field is important. And if you haven't watched Don't Look Up yet, you should, because that's another one, not that, you know, not as earth shattering, I think, as Inconvenient Truth, but still, it caused a stir.
I think too, a lot of like, if you're trying to get public motivation through pop culture or media, it's gonna be more effective if you have stories, whatever
Yeah.
form, books or movies or
Yeah.
shows that you stream. Those kinds of things tend to get people invested and interested more than just like the facts and figures. And so you like science deals with facts and stuff like that, like telling people like, hey, the average temperature is going up by X amount, or hey, these oceans are rising at alarming rates. That's not gonna do much typically without the emotional component, and like the communications and English and storytelling stuff really does a job of like getting those emotions out and like imagining what are these futures gonna be like. And we don't want that, so that was hopefully a motivator for that.
And I think, I just want to add to the conversation and, you know, bringing up the things that I remember, like the Live Aid concert farming and all those things that seem to be cultural touchstones about advocacy in the 80s that people were very aware of. I think now the dangerous time that we're in related to media is that we are so fragmented in our consumption. As a professor, I always try to use pop culture references, you know, try to be cool. Try to relate to people, but I'm finding more and more that I ask people, have you seen, do you know, did you watch, have you heard? And I don't get a lot of sameness in the experience. And so that's where it is somewhat now less of a powerful tool in some ways, because we lack a lot of shared media experience. We're able to curate our media in such a way that tailors to us and our needs. So, you know, my Instagram is a lot of like Bravo TV, and your Instagram might be something way different. And so it is a powerful tool, the messages, the stories. Stories are always going to be the way that we change. And I will say that forever. However, our media landscape is not helping us come together, and that's what I really worry. I heard a story yesterday on the way home. I think it was on NPR, and I looked it up before I came on, I forgot. But there was a climate scientist who was suing a right-wing media personality for defamation because he is on the forefront of talking about climate change and had a very talking about the planet, the temperature going up, right when fossil fuels became our main way of heating and doing a lot of what we do, and they're going to court cases now. Scientists are being defamed by these media figures, and the outrage society and people are getting behind this, and it becomes a very problematic space as well, because people can harness that falsehood and take it to extremes to where the climate scientists had to go to court to defend themselves over scientific facts. So the fragmentation is a little worrisome, and I would just say, if you can, try to create some commonality to some of these messages about climate and environmentalism, find credible sources and put it in the mix, because it's very easy to tune out, because we don't have the same shared media landscape that we do.
I think the thing that a lot of us are able to do in the humanities is encourage a more holistic way of understanding and crossing some of those boundaries. I know that not all my faculty colleagues will agree with me, but I love teaching gen ed courses. I'm something think I'm nuts when I say that. I mean, I love teaching my major courses also, but in a general education course, I get students who don't expect much. They don't think there could be anything interesting because after all, it's not in their major. And what I can do is I can make them see something they didn't see before. I can help them to cross some boundaries and get out of their silos. And when a student comes up to me, because I've shown a film that has to do with sustainability or something in a course, and I've had them analyzing the way it articulates its position, but I've had them being skeptical about something that might be very accepted in popular culture. And they say, are there more movies like this? I never knew there was something like this. That's what I live for. That's what I teach for. That's what happened to me when I came to college. Out of a first generation student situation. My parents didn't go to college. I didn't have the greatest early education, but I was curious. And professors helped me to see things and think in ways that were wonderful and exciting and unheard of for me before. And we can do that about issues in sustainability. And we can have people be skeptical about what they hear in some of those silos. Then I think we're doing our job at that.
Thank you all for those generous responses. So I want to ask a question to the audience. How many of you have been to a park? Almost every single one of you raised your hand. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of cool memories at that park, right? You have a relationship to the environment in that park, right? So my next question is how does the human relationship with nature affect how we use and think about it? What in our life frames our ethical view about nature and our relationship to it? Sorry if that was fast.
Because most of my research is Native American philosophy and ethics, colonization is the first thing that like comes to my mind as a framework. And so when I look at oftentimes approaches to or relationships with humans and the environment, it's easy to put it in terms of control. And so we're trying to control certain things. And when you contrast that with certain ideals like, well, instead of controlling nature, what if we tried to live with nature or live in harmony? And it's kind of one of those importance of values, like recognizing that there's a difference and that this framework colonization that we're under has done a lot to set up certain policies and ways that we communicate and things that we do that have maybe led to a lot of the problems that we're facing in the first place. And then the other thing was, I think this is me just being asshole or a-hole philosopher, but when I hear about a distinction, part of me, the instinct is to be like, is there really a distinction there? And I know in indigenous philosophy, that's one of those questions is, if I ask like, what is the distinction between nature and non-nature? I'm not sure that there's a good conceptual answer there. Like everything, even the plastic in this room came from the earth in some capacity. And so I think we tend to do a disservice when we think in terms of nature and non-nature, because nature then gets a status of this thing ought to be preserved and protected. But no, I already cursed on so like fuck whatever goes on in this room then, because this doesn't qualify as nature. So it doesn't matter how I treat my surroundings here. Not thinking that how you treat your surroundings in general probably plays out in other avenues as well. So like if I have roommates that are shitty to their laptops and chairs and furniture and beds and their surroundings, that probably doesn't stop when they're outside. It just takes kind of different form. And I think being able to challenge those kinds of distinctions as well as those values, I think that is sorely lacking, like in our culture. So.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that though, because it seems to me that the role of language here in creating values or like putting boundaries on our values, I think it really has a formative force. For example, to use your call response, look around or think about all the logos you know. All I have to do, right? Oh, I have to do it backwards. Let's go like this, right? And you say, yeah, I could show you a little apple with a bite out of it, right? And you don't think Adam and Eve, right? You think, here, okay, so all those that you know. Now I want you to think about all the trees you know. How many tree species you know that I can identify by just looking at a leaf or something? So exactly, I saw your expressions, right? So we have a literacy, right, that is crafted by consumerism, right, that enforces a divide and kind of like pulls us away from the natural just because of this language of symbols that we all live in. And I'll bore you briefly, Emma, with the other example I sometimes use in class, right? We're all sensitive to pronouns. We want to use the pronouns that people choose to respect their choices. When we think about our pets, right? They don't have the same, we don't know, right? What they're thinking about their gender identity. So we just stick to he, she, right? But then most of them are neutered. and we don't have a pronoun for that, or we don't deal with that. And then we move to a pronoun. And what happens to the pronoun? What do we go to? He, it, right? So we've got a line, even as we're thinking, let's open up those pronouns, right? We still have that line between us and nature that's framing that relationship and enforcing those values, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I was even looking just at the question, and I appreciate all the questions for sure. They're all wonderful, but
Thank you.
but the options of like how we use nature and think about it. There are so many other ways we can interact with nature, right? We can play, we can give back, we can do many things with our environment and the all the beings around us. And I think kind of one of the most important things I heard or have read is from Robin Paul Kimmerer, who's an Indigenous scientist and an artist, and she talks about how we should be thinking more of nature as a member of our family, like all of the ways in which we would treat our family. We don't worship our family members. We don't necessarily, put them on huge pedestals that, we can't interact with them, or that we trash our family members. We don't do any of those things, right? We try to treat them with respect, with love, with care, with tenderness, with understanding, sometimes with conflict, but those relationships are just that. They're relationships that are always ongoing, and that they will never be ended or destroyed. This change forms.
To kind of comment in the same vein, but to maybe articulate some terms about it. The problem is we're in the larger culture, a default mode. You can say hegemony if you want to fancy a word for it, where we're very individualistic, and we are individualistic as a species. We're individualistic as individuals operating economically and socially. Our great God term is freedom, but it directly gets in the way of us understanding our connection to other species. Even that word other is something that was questioned 30, 40 years ago. Emma knows all about this from my power politics and environmental writing class. You can find all about it. Called deep ecology. The idea that to separate the human from everything else, so this comes back in circle with all that you're talking about, is a big mistake. And it gets us into a wrong situation. But everything surrounding us is about how can we serve ourselves, even when it comes to climate change. How's it going to affect me instead of that frog? And how do I see that as something that is really a being in some way, as well as thinking about the people who don't look like me, aren't like me, or live near me. So what we need, and I'll go to philosophy term, we need a metanoia. You didn't know you did a master. No. We need to have, as a culture, a metanoia, which means you want to plan.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Don't be looking over here.
It's a change of spirit, a change of heart, a change in the way you root your assumptions and how you connect with the rest of the world. Is that one word? Okay. We need a metanoia as a culture if we're going to get to a place where we start to value something other than the individual, something other than kind of a neoliberal libertarian notion that says, yeah, for no reason at all, I'm going to sit in my car and let it idle while I play on my phone for an hour. Why do people do that? We don't ask those questions. We don't say, what is my action doing? Why am I doing this? Simply because I can, because I'm free to do so. We need to go beyond that and say, what freedoms are we hurting in terms of connections we could have that would enlarge our world in a positive way, in a way that's really good.
Well, I want to go up there and maybe something about when you brought up Kimmerer. I was trying not to mention her, but happy you did. I think, no, it's good. One of the things that I think along with that is like, how do we conceive ourselves? Like, if I ask, like, who are you? I'm assuming a fair number of us will list off hobbies that we have. Hobbies don't part of our personality. Or even if I ask, like, what traits do you have? Well, I'm a nice person. I'm quick tempered. Those kinds of things. But like an indigenous conception of self plays on like, well, what are my relationships? So when I define myself, who am I? Well, I'm a child, I'm a sibling, I am a pet caregiver, I'm a partner to someone, but it's the relationships that define who I am. Part of those relationships include the environment and the surroundings and things like that. And so in the same way that I can be judged to be like a shitty fiance or a bad child or something, I can also be judged as being bad with whatever surroundings that I find myself interacting with. Right? So,
The ethical view is part of the question too. I'm a mom to a toddler, and a lot of the reading that we're doing is of books that have animals as the central characters. And I see that connection with nature that feels very, feels very natural, feels very innate and intuitive, and that we have this as children where we see animals as friends, as partners, as those relating with us, and then that is lost somewhere along the way. And I don't know that, but I'll find out.
You'll find out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Everybody, it seems we have only like 5 minutes here, so that will conclude our questions for the day. I want to extend a large thank you to everybody who came out here. I didn't expect this large of a crowd, so thank you so much for dedicating your time and coming to talk with us here. Thank you so much to the panelists for your work and dedication to this project. Yes, that was my next point. Do you guys have any comments or questions for our panelists? Anybody on the Zoom have any comments or questions?
Can you mute yourself?
Yes.
I'd be happy to jump in. Let's see, can you hear me? Oops, now you're muted on your end, Callie, so.
Oh, boy. Yeah, you're good to go.
Good. I just wanted to say thank you. Really fascinating questions and responses and conversations amongst the panelists. So thank you to all of you involved in putting this together. I think we've learned a lot in getting your different perspectives. I'm wondering how these types of conversations happen when it's not just amongst people who are in the humanities, but between people who are humanities experts and those who are scientists, engineers, public policy specialists, medical professionals. How does that happen? I think at Westchester University, one place we see this is in our Sustainability Council, where we have faculty and students and staff from all kinds of disciplines working together. But are there other opportunities you see, or perhaps missed opportunities to communicate between the humanities and other disciplines in a productive way?
Are you talking about just on campus, or are you talking about my relationship with my engineer brother? Yeah,
Both. Both.
because it does have to do with like finding common ground, right? So finding that common interest. So if you're dealing with an engineer who's really into gardening, I have found that that's the way into some of these types of topics, right? So you're looking for the shared values, the shared ideas, the shared topics you're interested in. And then, oh, you come at it from science. Oh, I come at it from, this kind of sustainability point of view. Let's hash it out. And so, yeah, you do see a lot of them in the Sustainability Council, but I think it's also a good way to think about like talking to people who come from different disciplinary or mental worlds.
I want to kind of play on that. I think talking to students as well, because one of the things I noticed in my classes is when we do units on environmental ethics or sustainability, a lot of times students will come up after the class and say, hey, I was in this other class where we talked about X, Y, and Z. And that name, that like puts a name on my radar is like, okay, that's someone that I can talk to, or that's someone we can work with. And that ends up coming up more in conversation as we discuss that topic. And even little things like that, like the students who are taking all the gen ed courses are getting much more exposure to campus at large than I am when I'm just in my office and in Anderson Hall most of the time. And so making sure to have those kinds of conversations with students, I think will count as a good kind of exposure and introduction.
Do you get enough of this in your classes? Do you want more of this in your classes?
That's great.
Because that's where I hope these conversations can happen. A lot of our lives as professors, I'll speak for myself, but I know others feel this way, are happening because we have professors who woke us up a little bit and who showed us that there might be something more interesting than the job we first thought we were in school to get in kind of a vocational way. So I hope that you're able to be enriched in those classes by these kinds of discussions. Because I tell my students, you can verify this, some of the students, I'm a totally selfish person. I'm here because I don't know enough and I want all of you to inform me about the worlds you're in that I don't know about. So that as an old guy, my head won't turn to stone quite as fast. And I'll keep learning every minute because that is a blast and it's what I love. And I'm just in it for getting ideas from you and milking all of your good thinking and your good vibes and everything else. So I hope that that exchange can happen across boundaries all the time.
That's wonderful. I saw another question in the audience.
I was just gonna say, it's very interesting to see, like you said, you'd asked us or posed a question that like, have you guys heard enough of this? And in college, I wasn't expecting taking my gen ed courses to hear about sustainability, but I've heard it often in most of my classes. And it's nice to hear, like, the way you guys answered those questions and connected it together was very interesting, refreshing. We came today to get more information, and just seeing how everyone comes together and how it all does link together was really nice. So thank you guys.
Thank you. I thought I saw a hand in the back. Was that true?
I just have a question about okay, so you were talking about live aid and farm aid, like that.
Yeah.
What was the mentality back then about environmental studies compared to now? Because now it can feel a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot of information, it's a little scary. But back then, was it like that too, or not so much?
I mean, I feel like it was because of Silent Spring and because like in 70, the EPA, and there was a lot of change happening and things were being established. And then unfortunately the 80s came and things started to get dismantled and taken away. And now it just seems to be this ebb and flow of who's ever in charge and whatever they think is gonna get them to stay in office. So I felt, and I don't know, I was like 10. So I mean, I don't know, maybe someone has a better recollection of it, but it did seem like it was much more part of the culture, like more advocacy, getting people behind it. Earth Day was like, there were big celebrations in school. Like it just seemed like it was trying to take root, and it was coming from a lot of different directions. And I do think today it's really hard to get traction because we're so fragmented, and our media ecology is about us and our bubble. And so how do you break through that in a meaningful way where we have some sort of shared experience? It's really hard to do.
There's one other factor that's different, I think, in a significant way. In the pre-digital age, back when the dinosaurs roamed, I was young, had hair and all those things. People were outside more.
Yeah.
They were in connection with nature in a visceral and sensual way that I think people are not necessarily doing as much anymore, because we have a lot of other stuff that is distracting us, that sometimes is entertaining us. That's not all bad, but I think the intuitive and the logical, the scientific and humanities, it all needs to be served if we're going to do the best job possible of motivating ourselves and following through to help the next generation take care of what's been screwed up so far. I think that's a fair way to put it.
I think it's 12:55. So I just want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time in classes. So really quick, can we do a big round of applause for our panelists today? Thank you guys so much for being here, and people in person, feel free to keep, continuing the conversation amongst yourselves, but We're gonna log off and let everybody go where they have to go. And please take cookies to go. I don't want them to go to waste. Thank you.